company in town called Campaign Research. Campaign Research does exactly what its name suggests. They do research on election campaigns across Canada, and they have a new poll out, which they do this about every month or two, and they're called tracking polls, and it shows the negative ads that you've been looking at aimed at the PC party, at Patrick Brown and the PC party, have apparently had some effect. They've worked. And the Liberals and PCs have become very close. Now, you've heard me say often that nobody should ever dare to underestimate the Ontario Liberal Party or Premier Kathleen Wynne. Don't do that. If you do it at your peril. You've heard me say that many times, and undoubtedly you will again in what is now, seven and a half months before the next election. Wynne seems to lead kind of a charmed life in terms of electability. And she should never be counted out. A new poll shows that statement has some legs. Campaign Research is a conservative-leaning research company, I can say, and it has been instrumental in electing some luminaries that you'd know, like Rob Ford and John Tory, and I have to say, full disclosure, even me, in getting elected way back when. And they've done a poll over the last 3 days, and it says, as I've been talking about, that the PCs are still in the lead, but they're at 35% of voters who have indicated they're decided, and the Liberals are on their tail at 32%. With me is Eli Yufest, who is president and CEO of Campaign Research. Hi, Eli.
Hi, Peter. How are you today?
I am great. Now, tell me about this poll. This represents substantial change from what we've been seeing.
Exactly. Over the course of the beginning of this week through from November 6th through the 9th, so the data is really as fresh as it can get. We sampled 1,263 Ontario residents, and what we found is the Conservatives are ahead of the Liberals by just a little bit, 35% for the Conservatives versus 32% for the Liberals. What we've seen, though, and I think this is the interesting point, is let's call it since June, over the last 5 or 6 months, we've seen a narrowing of this result. So back in June, for example, we had the Conservatives, quite a bit ahead at 38% versus 30% for the Liberals, and obviously right now we see a narrowing of that. So what was an 8-point lead is now only a 3-point lead.
Which is, I have to assume, almost a statistical dead heat.
It is, exactly. So the margin of error, if we were to assign it on a sample like the one that we have, is about 2.7%. So it's totally within the 3% margin of error that we have, and so for all intents and purposes, they're effectively tight. I mean, there's no other way to say it.
Okay, so I want to get into it with you on why this has happened, but first I want to open the phone lines and invite people. Have at it, folks. I know how many people love to call and take a you-know-what on Premier Wynne. This is your chance to react to what you're seeing, because I think what's happened here is the change in election advertising laws has made something happen this time that has never happened in another election, which is the attack ads that are run largely by third parties, not by the PC party or the Liberal Party, although they've advertised too, have been on air for the past couple of months because of the change in election advertising laws. In fact, I think because of the way it goes, it's 6 months to the issuance of the election writ today, which means I would think that we're going to see a disappearance of those ads for a while. Does that make sense, and does it correlate with this change in the relative strength of the parties, Ellie?
Yeah, so exactly to your point, I think the regulations, I don't know off the top of my head what they changed, but certainly over the
I do. Let me explain that so that you can comment on it, because It's important. With the change in election advertising law, they restricted the amount of money that can be spent by third parties as well as by political parties on public advertising. And they said that it's unlimited until you get to the point where it's 6 months exactly from the issuance of the election writ. Well, that happened at the end of the day yesterday, which means today they can't just go unbridled onto television or radio or in the papers and advertise anything. They're now limited to, this is the third parties like WOW and Working Families, they're limited to $600,000 of spending over the course of the next 6 months, and that is a paltry sum compared to what they have been spending. So go ahead now, and in the context of that, comment for us on the relative strength of these parties.
Right. So And so thanks for that. That's great context. So certainly over the last month or two, we've seen, to your point, Peter, all the third-party ads as well as the partisan Liberal and PC ads on air, and they've been spending quite a bit. I mean, all one has to do was sit in front of the TV, on Sunday night prime time, 6, 7 o'clock in the evening, and all you would see really are these ads. And so there's no doubt that there was very, very significant investments made by all of those parties. And so really what we're seeing is, and we'll sort of talk about each one separately if I could for just a second.
Sure.
The PC ads, I have to assume the intent of the PC ads was to raise Brown's profile and raise his awareness. To date, and we've tracked this result, basically since the beginning of the year. A majority, 50%, or in and around that, don't know anything about Patrick Brown. So I have to assume that the PC ads were intended to raise his awareness and profile. And so what we've seen in our latest results is 50% of people continue to know nothing about Patrick Brown. The flip side of that is, of course, the third-party ads. And so I have to assume also that the third-party ads were targeted primarily at women, especially the WOW ads. And so what we see now, and this is sort of the biggest drop that we've seen to date, is among women voters in Ontario, we see approval ratings for Patrick Brown decline by a significant margin versus October. And so, for example, in October, Patrick Brown had 22% approval among women voters in Ontario. And we see this month he is at 15%. And so that is a significant decline. And, of course, the disapproval is also up by a significant margin among female voters. So,
and those were the ads where they showed him as a flip-flopper who couldn't make up his mind on social issues like abortion or same-sex marriage, and where he was in favor ostensibly of those as a federal MP, and is now saying he's not in favor of them as the leader of the party provincially.
Exactly.
Those are those ads.
Exactly. So so those are the ones that we're seeing are actually driving a lot of change among women voters. So approval is down by a significant margin. Disapproval is up for Patrick Brown by a significant margin. And there's no doubt that of all the ads that we've seen, it's very likely the third-party ads that are resonating the most and breaking through the most among the Ontario electorate.
Okay, so now that we see this date passed, today being the date, and the advertising on all parties, third parties and political parties, curtailed to what is, in relative terms, a very small amount, and we're going to see much more sparse airing of these ads, very, very highly targeted. Do you think that the momentum that the ads have created in the direction of the Liberals will hold, or do you think that Brown is aware of what's going on and has the people and the strength to pull this out?
Yeah, so at Campaign Research, we advise a number of private sector and public affairs clients, and so if I was counseling any one of the Liberal or PC parties, or even the NDP for that matter, what I would say is heavy up while you can, and so that they did exactly that. They spent a lot of money, getting out whatever message they wanted to get out. And the opportunity for them now, I think, is to leverage cheaper modes of advertising, like
social media, or
like online, to keep that message alive over the next, let's call it 5-6 months, right? And so that strategy could prove to be what any one of these parties, whether it's the third party or the Liberal Party or the PC Party, could employ if they want to maintain whatever messages that they have really spent quite a lot of money on, over the last month. If they want to maintain it, that would probably be the strategy that I would employ and that I would counsel on.
Very interesting. Eli Yufest, always a pleasure to talk to you and sometimes meet you on the steps of buildings. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. I'm sure we'll have you on air a number of times between now and next June.
Perfect. Thanks so much for the time, Peter.